Hi everyone. This presentation is about the life of Leonardo da Vinci for Art 503. Italian inventor painter Leonardo da Vinci set the foundation for high Renaissance style sculpture, drawings, painting, and architecture. He also made many novel discoveries in anatomy, engineering, medicine, and botany, and they were unparalleled until the 20th century. Unquote. His inventions and discoveries were a century ahead of time. This presentation introduces and describes Leonardo's upbringing, outlines his career in Florence, Milan, Rome, and France. He grew up in the abundance of nature, which allowed him to explore and cultivate inquiry learning. As a teenager, he trained his art skills as an apprentice of Verrocchio's workshop. However, he was influenced by humanism theories, and so he started questioning the art education of the old guild system from the Middle Ages. As a master, Leonardo was not only an inventor and a creator, but also had a desire for teaching. His humanistic and mathematical and scientific approaches to art and his art school took the form of Academy of Philosophy, and he was interested in sharing his knowledge and approaches with his students. And during his professional career periods, he recorded many of the specific drawing, paintings, methods he used, such as observing object for creating art. Leonardo's notes were saved by Melzi and Vasari, and those book found laid a foundation of a first Academy of Art many years after Leonardo's death. Early life and education. The Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15th, 1452, on the Tuscan hill of Vinci, about 70 miles west of Florence, to an illegitimate son of Sir Piero da Vinci and a local young woman who was thought to be a peasant named Caterina. Sir Piero was descendant of minor official in the region and played an essential role as a notary and landlord. Leonardo was born outside of marriage, and the father was an ambitious business person, and he was not cooperative enough to raise his son. As soon as Leonardo was born, his father left Caterina and a baby Leonardo behind Da Vinci and went back to Florence. So Leonardo grew up on his father's side of the family estate and spent most of his childhood at his grandfather's home. Uh, but with his grandfather's support, he received some elementary education from abacus school, where basic commercial math was taught, and he was not sent to Latin schools that taught the important humanities and the classic literature. When Leonardo was young, Latin was considered an essential language for professionals. However, he gained the necessary skills by teaching himself, such as writing, reading, and arithmetic. Since Leonardo was born as a love child, his father knew he would not meet the criteria to be a notary. So his father did not force him to study. So he primarily lived with his grandfather, surrounded by abundance of nature in the Tuscan hill village that allowed him to explore and experiment. Because of his circumstances, and that he was free from family obligations, and his lack of formal schooling experience led to broadening his curiosity and gaining wisdom, which cultivated empirical research to discover the phenomena. So, first Florence period, 1464 to 1482. When Leonardo turned 13 years old, his father brought Leonardo to Florence. And when he turned 15 years old, his father acknowledged Leonardo's talent as a painter. So he was sent to the renowned workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio. The Verrocchio was a well rounded artist and engineer. Leonardo became an apprentice of the workshop and received multidiscipline training there. Verrocchio offered a rigorous training program that included light and shade on materials such as draperies, surface anatomy, mechanics, and drawing techniques. And Leonardo spent 6 years as an apprentice, And in 1472, when Leonardo was 20 years old, he was recognized as a full-fledged painter and registered with the Guild of St. Luke. This event made Leonardo master. However, he did not immediately start his own workshop. Instead, he remained working in Verrocchio's workshop as his master's collaborator. He also worked in the workshop of the artist named Antonio Polaiolo, who was Verrocchio's commercial competitor. And he also was influenced Polaiolo's way of making art. And Polaiolo was investigating muscles and skin of the human body to understand the nude in the modern way, as well as to experiment with the expression of twisting and moving the body. First Milanese period, from 1482 to 1499. Leonardo, at the age of 13, moved to Milan in 1482 to work for Duke Sforza. He spent 17 years in Milan, and during this duke's tenure as a master artist, Leonardo ran an extensive studio in Milan, and his students were at the time, including Salai and Bernardo di Conti and Andrea Solari and Marco di Giano and Giovanni Antonio Boltrafio. And Leonardo treated well in Milan, and but because Sforza, who liked the banquets, and so he was signed to work outside of his day job, mainly as a general director of banquets, as a stage director, and a costume designers. At the same time, Leonardo was able to spend much of time examining the human body and anatomy, such as studying the mechanism of eyes. It was around this time that began writing his famous Da Vinci's manuscript and the notebooks, his research. Second Florence period, 1500 to 1508. At the beginning of the 16th century in Florence, Medici, a great supporter of the arts and humanities, started losing power. The Dominican monk Savonarola had expelled the Medici family from the city with his strict policy by burning artworks as a symbol of corruption. So Leonardo returned to Florence in the spring of 1500, only 2 years after Savonarola's downfall. Florence was in turmoil at this time, but at the field of art, an up and coming genius named Michelangelo was making great strides. So Leonardo grew more interested in scientific study, and Leonardo dissected the human body in the hospital in Santa Maria Nova and extensively studied human organs. He examined the flight of birds, nature, and the movement of water, and the properties of water and air. Those data were collected and organized in the Codex Leicester. Second Milanese period, 1508 to 1513. So in 1506, Leonardo had another turning point when the French governor Charles d'Amboise invited Leonardo to Milan. So Governor d'Amboise, who was an art lover, wanted to revive Milan as a city of art like before with Leonardo's lead. And this was also the wish of King Louis XII of France himself. So he was well treated by a French governor and a king. So he did well in Milan. But during this period, he painted only a few, and but still, Leonardo gathered students around him, including De Conti and Salai, and more new students such as Cesare de Sesto and Bernardo Luini and Francesco Melzi. And Francesco Melzi is who was 17 years old at the time, and accompanied Leonardo as his student, and was most faithful to Leonardo. The Leonardo and Melzi worked together until the time of Leonardo's death, and he inherited most of his fortune. And Leonardo's second stay in Milan was very peaceful and fruitful and productive. So Leonardo's scientific research flourished during this period. In a collaboration in the De La Torre and a famous anatomist from Pavia, and he planned to complete his manuscripts in the winter of 1510 to 1511. He outlined all the work he had done with the human body and organs in detail, and it encompassed the whole field of physiology and comparative anatomy. And moreover, the manuscripts included a mechanical and geological, botanical and optical and mathematical studies. Leonardo's last years in Rome and France, 1513 to 1519. When his patron Charles the Ambrose died in 1511, he received a commission from Rome. So he completed with Salai, Melzi, and the other studio assistants. When that was over, he was moved to France. And the France time, he did not do commission work so much. However, Leonardo was believed to start compiling manuscripts of movements of animals, plants, blueprints for new machines, and reflections of the properties of water. And in most of this time in France was used to reorganize his study. On May 2nd, 1519, Leonardo was taken care of King Francis I and his faithful student Melzi, and passing away at 65 years old. And then most of his fortune was inherited by Melzi. Leonardo and the Renaissance Humanism. Quote, Leonardo's deep engagement with the world inspired his compassion for people, animals, and environment, and Renaissance humanism, and a guiding idea of Leonardo's time, valued human dignity and education while seeking humanity's natural place within the universe. Because he loved the world as deeply as he studied it, and Leonardo's work now symbolized a philosophy. Unquote. During Leonardo's apprentice period, artists were commonly work for the guild system, so they were not considered a cultural elite and just a worker, and art was not for self-expression or creativity. And now, the position of artists in the society it start changing because the scholastic doctrines were denied and humanities scholarship became popular. Neoplatonic scholar Marsilio Ficino said the love and beauty would practically influence the theory of the arts and their value in human beings. And such statement views the idea for the acceptance of the artist as a member of the cultural elite, and opposed to the medieval minds, the artists were just merely skilled craftsmen. So, intellectual artists such as Leonardo came to be recognized as cultural elite in society. Influences on young Leonardo. Besides two workshop masters, there were two scholars who had a formative influences on young Leonardo. The one was Filippo Brunelleschi, who was a designer of the cathedral dome. He was influenced by his visual perspective concept. The other scholar was Leon Battista Alberti, who had a similar upbringing as the illegitimate son, and also he was interested in math and art. So Leonardo was a teenager in France, and Alberti was 60s and spent most of the time in Rome. So according to Isaacson in 2017, it was doubtful that they directly know or exchanged ideas with each other, but Alberti was one of the Leonardo's most important influences, and it was because and Alberti identified himself as the avatar of grace in every word or movement. And Leonardo studied his treatise, and he tried to copy Alberti's writing style and his behavior. So the Alberti and Leonardo's intellectual arguments about the art education criticize an old art education that had been strictly controlled by the guild system for Middle Ages. They argued humanistic learning was important in art education, but the workshop masters could only provide them a high level of the craftsmanship. Leonardo also questioned the art education of the workshop, where they stressed practice over observation and a free interpretation. Leonardo said, quote, study knowledge first and then follow the practice dictated by this knowledge, unquote. And this idea, concept of learning and teaching of art was revolutionary at the time. And such relationship, teacher and students, could only exist in academy. There were conducted pure inquiry learning and free interpretation. With the new concept of art education, Leonardo started using the term academy for the art education circle or school. And the type of education circle in the Renaissance for artists, made by artists. And at the same time, traditional educational program of the guild system fell into jeopardy. In early Renaissance in art education, there was no specific curriculum, but in his circle, Leonardo addressed the specific painting and drawing process, which insists copy drawing by a good master made by his art from nature. So the Pevsner said, quote, the theoretical thoughts and movements that Leonardo involved established the solid foundation of all the subsequent system of art education, unquote. Leonardo's scientific discoveries, inquiries, and also the art education approaches impact on artists' next generation. So the term Leonardeschi has been used to identify painters were taught by or associated with Leonardo. The first formal Academy of Art. The Accademia del Disegno was the first Academy of Art founded in 1562. It was established by artist historian and artist biographer Giorgio Vasari. 36 remarkable artists were chosen to be members. At this time, most of great masters were getting old or had passed away already, so the movement emerged to preserve and inherit their great legacy. So Vasari attempted to develop rules of art based on Leonardo's great amount of observation, analysis, experiments, and discoveries from Leonardo's notebooks. Conclusion. Leonardo, who was equipped with multiple intelligences through his experience, was one of the great masters of the Renaissance. He was an all around genius who was famous not only as a painter but also as a sculptor, architect, and a scientist. Leonardo emphasized that sketching from good masters who learned well from nature was the foundation of art. He insisted on the importance of looking at objects thoroughly and learning from nature. If you take a closer look at an object, you may find that is actually quite different than you imagine. This is not something that is limited of drawing, but in our daily lives and relationships, if we look at things from a slightly different perspective, or if we look at things in nature and people carefully, we can make unexpected discoveries and realizations. Leonardo indeed laid the foundations of Western art education, such as an experience based, humanistic, and nature based inquiry learning. Leonardo's broad interest in art education approach he established through inquiry learning inspired many artists in later generations. His art education approaches, recorded in his notebooks, influenced the development of the basis of academic of art education in Europe by Leonardo's biographer Giorgio Vasari. Many renowned artists in a century after Leonardo's death still admired and followed his style of painting, and his legacies continue in today's art education. Thank you.